G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. So far a fantastic week. I almost said a Friday, but you'll have to hang on just 24 more hours. Now today, of course, we have a lot to go over. We need to look at the maps. We need to look at some Ukrainian and some Russian offensive actions and where the maps are changing and where it's replicated across multiple different sources of maps as well. We need to look at some strikes and some geolocations of these strikes and the weapons used of what is interesting, as well as some new weapons that Ukraine will be receiving. But the main portion, the meat of this video, of course, is going to be talking about the Ukrainian President Zelensky's victory plan getting made public for the first time, presented to then the government in Ukraine and through then the civilian population. But of course, we see this. Now, we need to talk about this at length because for many people, this was underwhelming. This was some of the criticisms we also received from US officials who had seen this. And the main critique I'm seeing online about this is that it doesn't have any internal change within Ukraine. It's all focused very externally. So what we're actually going to do, we're going to go over this in full. We're going to do like a short brief of what the points are, then the long brief of what those points are. We're going to look at exactly what Zelensky said, not just clips of it. And we're going to look at reactions, both positive and negative, and critiques of the plan as well as one that I find very interesting. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to present you what I would have as the victory plan if I was sitting in Zelensky's seat. Not as taking the piss, as something where me seeing this war, seeing how it's going, sitting back and looking, what do I see as what I would put in this? Because many times I get asked, will you criticize this or you say this, but what would you do? So I'm going to try and break down that for you. Anyway, so like I've said, this is not a plan. This is a wish list, which at point 1 does fail. And it's no surprise that US officials said that they're disappointed and underwhelmed by this. So before we break down my plan, let's go over what it actually was. Addressing MPs on Wednesday, Zelensky criticised China, Iran, North Korea for their backing of Russia, described them as the coalition of criminals. Now, we'll go over exactly what Zelensky did say, but we do hear about in intelligence circles people calling China, Russia, Iran, North Korea the axis of upheaval. That said, China, which is absolutely growing in power around the world, could be a massive fulcrum for a turning point of this war. That relationship between Ukraine and China is absolutely necessary if there is to be some diplomatic end to this war, not military. And that's something we did see at the Swiss Peace Conference that did fail to come about. But Zelensky said he'd present the victory plan to the EU summit on Thursday, saying we are at war with Russia on the battlefield, in international relations, in the economy, in the informational sphere, and in people's hearts. The plan outlined by Zelensky consists of 5 key points. Number 1, inviting Ukraine to join NATO military alliance. Now, this is not going to happen now. We know this is not going to happen while there is still an active war. Even after the war, there are still going to be a lot of compliancy, corruption issues for Ukraine to join NATO. It's not going to be day one straight in. At least that's how I see it. Number 2, the strengthening of Ukrainian defense against Russian forces, including getting permission from allies to use their long-range weapons on Russian territory. We know the US has turned this down multiple times. And the continuation of Ukraine's military operations on Russian territory to avoid the creation of buffer zones in Ukraine. Syriac does say today, as we'll look at the maps later, that there has been a deployment of more Ukrainian forces into Kursk, likely to try and hold that before the US elections. Number 3, containment of Russia via non-nuclear strategic deterrent package deployed on Ukrainian soil. Again, NATO entry here, same as the close the air over Ukraine. Yes, the close over the air over Ukraine was a nice gesture. What does that take? It would take NATO aircraft and air defense systems sitting not only within Ukraine striking in Ukrainian airspace. To close the airspace, you'd also have to have those striking Russian jets in Russian airspace. To take down a Tu-160, you're going to have NATO airplanes flying over there, taking those down. also see, but after the war, what could happen here. We'll talk about that more. Joint protection by the US and the EU of Ukraine's critical natural resources, there's trillions of dollars, and joint use of their economic potential. Remember, each one of these points we're going to break down in length. For the post-war period only, replacing some US troops stationed across Europe with Ukrainian soldiers. 3, add-ons remain secret and will only be shared with Ukraine's partners. So only with their primary partners, these secret bits and pieces. So I can see why people are saying, well, this is underwhelming. We're going to look at this and we're going to go, well, the 2 main points here, number 1 and 2, have already been turned down, we know, multiple times. And there's even problems with the others. It doesn't talk about any internal problems. And it's not really a victory plan. It's not really a plan. It's more of a wish list. But how do you get from point A to B to C to D to 1991 border? So what I'm going to do, in fairness, is I'm going to then give you what I see as what my victory plan would be right now. But I'll be back in 1 second. So I just quickly put together the points that I see would be absolutely necessary for a victory plan. More what I guess people were expecting. This is very tight since I left the army. It's too many schnitties down at the pub. But a victory plan needs to have a set objective and how actions taken will lead to that objective. What is the end goal here? This is why the West ultimately failed in Afghanistan. The clear end goal, the goalposts of what the end were, moved and moved and moved and moved. 20 years later, $1 trillion later, we're out. And it's worse than before. So number 1 in my plan would be supporting Ukraine's ability to mobilise 500,000 troops through Western trainings, arms, and support of returning men 18 to 60 who are in Europe. So what I would say was, the way I put it was, look, we are prepared to mobilise 500,000 guys, but we need help doing this. We need help in the training, arming these guys, and who is out of the country illegally as well. So it would be point number 1, look at what we are willing to do, but we need your help, willingness to do this to get that manpower. We know the biggest problem at the moment that I'm seeing in Ukraine is manpower. Point number 2 would be air defense support on the NATO border within Ukraine. Now, this is also in parts of the plan too, to shoot down anything that those systems can reach from there. But also a strict guarantee of the delivery of systems. Not these promises, but no, it needs to be on this date, at this time, as you've promised this, and a guarantee of we will be receiving 100 missiles per month indefinitely or something. But it needs to be a bit of, we're willing to do this, you can be willing to do this. As we have seen, there's many critiques saying with Ukraine not willing to have another huge mobilization, there is a unwillingness in like the US to go, well, why are we going to supply more? So a bit of that goes down to number 1. Number 3, support for fortifications. We know one of the biggest problems is the lack of, or at least the build-up of fortifications in Ukraine. And that is due to many issues. But I'd be putting out, look, how would it be to have private contract come in to do this? Either if it is old army engineers, private company, however, to build these. We've done this before. We have deployed private contractors into war zones before to put up HESCO barriers, to build fortifications before. Is there going to be strikes against it? Yeah, absolutely. But fortifications, or at least help support to build those fortifications, absolutely necessary, because that then has an effect on how many men you need, how much ammo you need, and the willingness and morale of those guys to defend positions too. Number 4 would be support and counter corruption. So we know there are huge problems, millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars that are just leaking into corruption. Not only is it having an effect for ammo at the front, it's affecting morale, the psychological impact on troops and civilians within the government and this corruption. And we know Ukraine's been trying to somewhat get on top of it, but there's still a shitload of problems as well. We've seen that leak into fortifications. So further support internally, going, we need some help to counter this corruption here as well, so every penny can be spent the best way possible. So real movements on that. Number 5 would be support democratic processes. So further support to support democracy within Ukraine, whether through elections, plebiscites, however, but more support of that. So we're showing we're willing to do this, but we need help to do this. So it needs to be a give and take. What I've seen, I have a friend that works in politics, I can't say who, but he says the reason Ukraine and Russia have so much Problem is Ukraine works its politics off guilt. Russia works its politics off threats. Neither of those really ring through to a lot of Western politicians. That is what he told me. Number 6 is a price guarantee on exported goods until 2027. It could be 2030, I don't know. I just put a date in there. I think by 2027 the war will probably be done. But of course, things go up and down with international fluctuations in price of grain, of steel, of oil, of gas, of whatever. But look, Ukraine's going to need a lot of money for then rebuilding, for arming all of this. We don't want our products to go up and down. So if we're selling grain, let's just say at $10 a kilo, I know that's probably a lot, let's just go $10 a kilo, and it sinks to 8, well then the Western countries are filling that other $2. But if it goes to 12, we're still getting that, but you can fill that just to give it more stability in the market. Post-war security from internal and external threats. So post-war security guarantees, I'm not saying NATO, but some sort of guarantee against further aggression from Russia coming in, however the war ends, and also internally to go back to number 5 for democracy and 4 on corruption. So if there's internal problems here too, through democracy not being upheld or further corruption by oligarchs, that there is internal security there too. So things aren't just going to fall apart. Number 8 is non-recognition of occupied borders. So regardless of where the guns fall silent, that you in the future won't recognise that as the new border, regardless of where the war ends, or at least the hot war ends. That you're never going to recognise X or Y territory as Russian and not Ukrainian. Further, in number 9 here, would be international support for Ukrainian civilians in occupied regions. This is something that gets forgotten about all the bloody time. The people behind that line, the civilians, they are Ukrainian still. The level of support for that, well, that could be a real problem. We don't know where the border's going to end, but we still know there's millions of people within occupied territory. So, hey, look, our people are stuck behind this line. We need international support for them now, and also if the guns fall silent and people remain over there, as well as diplomacy of trying to get those people out and back into Ukraine if they so wish. Number 10 would be demographic support. So to be fully blunt, go, look, we have a real demographic crisis. A lot of people have left the country. A lot of people have died, and we already had a demographic crisis before the war, and this is getting very, very dire. We need support of that. Whether it is support through fertility doctors, however, through stabilisation of the economy, so that links down to point number 6, through maybe ending or more support for the war, and point number 1. So then with this demographic support, you may feel comfortable to then mobilise within 18 to 25, and either it is through like fertility doctors or however, or then through European to Ukraine immigration. Could you put, look, there is going to be this incentive to move your business to Ukraine. There's this incentive to move to Ukraine, or through EU. We know EU has a lot of immigration into Ukraine. Now, I know there's a whole list and can of worms of sticking points that opens then with immigration, but there's going to have to be some way to fix this demographic support, but that may lead to Ukraine's point number 1 here that I've made, to feel more comfortable to mobilise in that age bracket also. So look, I probably missed a lot in that, but that's what I see that I would be putting forward in a victory plan, not a wish list. This is how we want to achieve victory. We need a stable country. We need demographic support so we can mobilise between 18 and 25. Well, we mobilise more people, but we need your help to mobilise. We're willing to do it, but we need your help to do it. We need your help, support to train, arm those guys, but we also need support if people get killed for how we then stabilise the demographics in our state. So it needs to be a bit of a push and pull somewhat. But that's how I see it for a victory in the war, not a wish list of most of points have already been shot down by leaders around the world. Who was that bloody bloke? Anyway, let's get back into it. So what we'll look over now is we'll look at what Zelensky actually said. We'll break down the pieces, and then we'll look at the reactions, as I think we get a lot of the reactions from people who are experts in the field, as well as other Ukrainian lawmakers. So let's have a bit of a look here that has gone along with some of this. that 2 years ago at the G20, the president of Ukraine introduced the peace formula, a strategy to end Russian aggression on the basis of the goals and the principles of the UN Charter. Nearly 100 companies from all regions of the world endorsed it. This June, a successful inaugural peace summit, I would question successful, demonstrating that the negotiation format can be effective in bringing an end to the war. Remember, 2 years ago, the peace formula, the war in November 22, was incredibly different to then October, November 2024. This peace summit, it didn't involve China or Russia. The key players in here, I'd give up 50 or 60 of those 100 countries to have China to support that plan. The victory plan is a path to strengthening Ukraine. This is exactly the kind of Ukraine strengthening that is needed not only to defend our positions, but also to build a bridge to the second peace summit, which will put a fair end to this war for Ukraine. This is the thing. They want Russia to come to this and Russia then have a complete surrender of from Putin to the other leaders to all of the territories. I don't believe parts of this plan are strong enough to make Russia come to that, as we can see the way that they have responded to this as well. So let's break down further these actual parts off then his website. So the first point about Ukraine joining NATO. Determination on the NATO issue for Ukraine also means the inevitability of European integration for Ukraine, and the fact that there is no alternative to democracy in Ukraine. That is why the initial point of the victory plan, the first and very important point, the sign of determination. This is what the invitation is, an unconditional invitation right now. So right now, we want an invitation. It doesn't mean an entry into NATO, but at least an invitation. What that does is it shows Russia we are not going anywhere. NATO is not going anywhere. We hear the NATO rhetoric about how this is existential for NATO, but NATO's then actions do not reflect this existential threat. If they're not willing to give even long-range weapon systems or modern systems, it doesn't matter what they say about this existential threat of this war, their actions are not displaying this. But we also know that multiple times has been shot down for NATO entry or official invitation. Even after the guns fall silent, there's still probably a lot that Ukraine need to do to meet those requirements for NATO. The second point, the irreversible strengthening of Ukraine's defence against the aggressor. That there is a clear list of weapons capable of sustaining necessary strength of the Ukrainian warriors, destroying Russia's offensive potential in occupied territory. So further operations within Russia, similar to Kursk. It's also based on the assistance of partners, particularly in equipping reserve brigades for the AFU, bolstering air defence, shooting down Russian drones and missiles jointly with partners, and the long-range weapon systems as well. This is what my number point was, but it needs to be put in with mass mobilisation as well. This has an annex, which is accessible to only those partners for appropriate military assistance capability. So it'll be specifically what parts of what is going to happen, so secret stuff in there. Third point is deterrence. The deterrence package is the fact that Russia is going into diplomacy or going to lose its war machine. So that there has to be a comprehensive non-nuclear strategic package put onto the territory of Ukraine, sufficient to protect Ukraine from any military threat further by Russia. Again, what this means is going to have NATO on the ground way further. If NATO is not willing at this point to give long-range strike capability, they're not willing to do this at least until after the war. There's another secret annex on this as well. The fourth point is strategic economic potential. Involves natural resources and critical metals worth trillions of US dollars, including uranium, titanium, lithium, and graphite, all incredibly important resources coming into the future. There's another secret annex connected to this, as well as the food as well that Ukraine does supply the world. The fifth point is security related. Designed for the post-war period and involves, if partners agree, the replacement of certain US military contingent stationed in Europe with Ukrainian units that have gained real experience in modern warfare. So instead of US troops being somewhere, that it's going to be Ukrainian troops instead. I don't really see the importance of this. The Ukrainian experience should be used to strengthen defence of the entire alliance. Yes. I don't see why it would be then a replacement. Ukrainian troops are the only troops within NATO once this ends that is going to have combat, conventional protracted warfare experience. Absolutely true. That doesn't mean you replace them, but you take those guys, use them to gain some experience amongst other units. The US is always going to just have just the amount of stuff, logistic supply that the US has as the world military superpower. So European countries aren't just going to want to kick out that with just to replace with combat experienced troops from Ukraine. It's going to probably be a mix of A and B, but that is the fifth point there for then after the end of the war. So let's look at what some of the reactions were to this, and we'll speak about what Zelensky said in his speech. Ukrainian lawmakers have voiced their first reactions to President Volodymyr Zelensky's presentation of Ukraine's victory plan. Some opposition lawmakers criticised it for being too vague and relying too much on international partners while omitting domestic issues. It is incredibly vague. Like I said, it needs to have a clear, this is what we are doing to achieve X, Y, and Z goals, and it doesn't take into account any domestic issues from mobilisation to corruption to democracy. Therefore, there's going to be no sign of willingness there. You scratch your back, I scratch your back, you scratch mine sort of thing. That's why I think this is falling flat. And we already know the US, they've seen this for weeks and they were not impressed by it, or have they backed it? This lawmaker here of the formerly opposition party, we know what's happening with the oppositions, he said that the plan had a great agenda, but the actual steps to achieve remain unclear. So it's not clear of, okay, we know this may be the goal, but what step is being taken through this? Alexei Honcharenko, a lawmaker from the opposition European Solidarity Party, led by former President Petro Poroshenko, criticised the plan for supposedly relying too much on outside assistance without requiring steps from the Ukrainian leadership. Where is the clause to fight against corruption, on strengthening our democratic institutions? Exactly, and that is very important to the West. And it's important in Ukraine too, to make sure this is actually being run efficiently. And you speak about world orders and orders within the West, well, it needs to be part of this as well. The lawmaker described the plan as empty words that are removed from reality. His party colleague, I won't even try, praised the plan's general goals, but criticised its focus on international support, noting the word partners has been used more often than Ukraine and Russia. She also pointed out the absence of homework Ukraine needs to do to achieve these goals, such as anti-corruption reforms that are necessary steps for NATO membership. So yes, these reforms are still going to have to take place, even if the guns then fall silent. I wonder why the president has come to Parliament now. For me, this is a signal of the seriousness of the situation at the front, in the economy, of the shift of the global stage. The return of the borders of 1991 is no longer heard, but the fact that certain territories may have to be liberated through political, diplomatic measures was also not heard. So how does this lead to the liberation of those territories? Further, a third European Solidarity lawmaker has said the most important thing Zelensky said was that the Ukrainian troops could replace, in particular, American troops in Europe, partners troops, because they have experience. So he's saying that's the most important piece, but that's for after the war. The most important thing is, how does the war end? And for Ukraine, how do they end up being victorious in this war? According to the same bloke, the themes voiced by President Zelensky will obviously be used by Democrats in the presidential campaign. It would be difficult for the Republicans to object them. That is, it can be used by both parties in the US. I think it's very easy for the Republicans to use this, because they will go along the lines of, this victory plan needs NATO involvement, whether it is further support on the ground for that non-nuclear deterrence, whether it is NATO invitation, and the Republicans go, we don't want to be dragged into a conflict. We want the war to end. We don't want it to extend and us get dragged in eventually with US intervention. Therefore, it's actually used that way as well. That's how I think the Republicans will use it. And it's going to cost a shitload more money, which we do know a lot of the Republicans are against more funding. If this plan is agreed with Western allies, I'm in fully support of the plan. If they are not ready for it, he is only talking about it for the sake of public relations. Then it will be a big disappointment. So far, we have not seen the Western allies agree to this plan. Now, again, it is not, this sounds bad, but it's not going to matter if it's Australia. I'll say Australia first, because we're not a big enough player. It's not going to matter if it's Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. It's going to matter if it's the US first and foremost. Well, it has to be the US if it is going to have any success. Then Germany, France, UK. Realistically, Japan, maybe South Korea. But those are the big hitters that will need to support it if it's going to have any real success. Now, John Helen, Really like what he says on Twitter. Go and follow him. He says, honestly, I'm not surprised if the victory plan is partly a way of setting up the internal discourse towards blaming the West for defeat. We've seen a lot of this, a lot of messaging being like it's nothing internal, it's all external why things aren't going well. And most of the criticism of the plan was that it had nothing internally. Asking for things your allies have already refused multiple times is obviously not feasible and lets Ukraine skirt discussions on internal issues. Otherwise, it's a bland, lukewarm and unsurprising. Once again, I didn't really expect anything more, but I'm still somehow disappointed and I have trouble articulating why. Maybe it's a genuine cry for help. Maybe it's a way to clean the political plate for post-war. I don't think it's going to shame the collective West into action, but it's also not going to endear the West to Ukraine for post-war. It doesn't take a single look at Ukraine internal issues. The only thing it does is that it shifts the focus away from decision makers in Ukraine. Remember, a lot of people say, yeah, okay, the West has responsibility. They haven't delivered some of these systems, blah, blah, blah. But you can't ignore command issues around manpower and problems at the front line too, where that is nothing to do with the West. It's internal command and corruption, of which has taken millions, if not tens, or if not hundreds, if not a B, off areas that could be in the front. It's same as then fortifications. Or rather, the only one it really benefits are the decision makers. So the plan really only benefits the decision makers. What it also achieves is setting the tone of discourse in the West. But that was always Ukraine's to do, because taking the Russian proposal seriously was never going to happen in the West. So sort of shifting that blame across. Now, let's look at what Zelensky has said about Russia, North Korea, and most importantly, China. This is in his speech. You can look at the full thing on his website if you want to read through it yourself. The urgency of the victory plan is now. If we began following this idea, this concrete victory plan right now, it may be possible to end the war no later than next year. It speaks about these areas, but also about the fate of other countries. The Baltic states, Finland, countries that are our neighbours, the Balkans, countries in Central Asia, Georgia, and Moldova, speaking further, trying to push this existential threat to other areas of the world and what happens if Russia had a victory. And countries from other regions of the world that are far away from us in Ukraine, but very close to our partners. This includes Libya, Syria, and countries of the Sahel region. The battles in which Ukrainians are fighting now, right here in Ukraine, for their independence, are deciding whether the world will plunge into more wars. Russia and its accomplices want more wars. This is fact. For us, entirely legitimate to turn to our partners for support in this battle. This is what one of those lawmakers said. It was not Ukraine and Russia. They keep saying partners in this as well. For our partners, it's completely practical to help us not only endure, but also to prevail in war. For our lives, in doing so, they will help themselves as much. Saying that these other countries, China, Russia, Iran, they want more war. And in doing so, if you help Ukraine win, you will stop more war. If you don't, then there will be more war. See this? Yeah. In the coalition of criminals alongside Putin, there is already North Korea, the Kim family, which holds more than 20 million Korean people in slavery. Our intelligence documents not only the transfer of weapons from North Korea to Russia, but also the transfer of people. These are workers in Russian factory replacing Russian citizens killed in the war, or then personnel to go to the Russian army. And this is already a fact. In fact, this is now the participation of the second state in a war against Ukraine on the side of Russia. Now, we've spoken about North Korean deployment, but again, there is still no evidence of this. This is from New York Times. Neither Ukraine or South Korea has presented evidence of North Korean troops. No Secretary Mark Rutte said Wednesday that the alliance did not have definitive information on that possibility. Remember, what it could be is people, like say, North Koreans moving into factories to allow Russian soldiers, well, Russians to go and train and go onto the front line, or in other areas. It doesn't exactly mean combat troops. Even if it is that, what then changes? How many is it? There was already a big problem between having people from jail come into the front line and they spoke Russian. There's going to be a huge shift between guys that speak, but not even the language to go in, gain experience. We don't really know. But still, we haven't had definitive proof that this is occurring. American intelligence and military officials expressed some skepticism at the Ukrainian claims that North Korean mercenaries are now fighting in significant numbers against Ukrainian forces. But they said they had little doubt about North Korean engineers and observers that are in Russia and parts of Ukraine, so occupied areas, in part to construct, operate North Korean ballistic missiles and that Russia has purchased. Remember, we have people inside, when I say we, the West as a whole, for missile systems as well that are operating. That is a known fact. We know that from all the German leaked phone calls, as well as how these systems, longer range systems, work. That is why a lot of the long range systems are not being signed off, is because, well, it's a Westerner doing this and that, and it's a Western satellite doing this, and it's going to be on that territory. How does that look? Where's the reaction to this? There have been unconfirmed reports of North Koreans killed in Ukrainian attacks. So unconfirmed. People said 18. I don't know how anyone got that figure. But the American officials said that they were recruits. One official said that they would not be surprised if North Korea sends troops to train and perhaps fight, but they did not have any evidence. So they're saying there's no evidence yet, but some of the North Koreans that may have been killed, well, they could go to Russia and sign up through then foreign programs as well. The Iranian regime's support for Putin, as well as China's cooperation with Russia. Internationally, I think more importantly, is actually the other way, is Russia's support back into the Iranian regime, what's happening in the Middle East as well, and where other countries can be easily drawn into this too. Despite their statements, Beijing, China, refrains from taking truly serious, effective steps to stop Putin going into this coalition of criminals. We must speak honestly, Ukrainians, and to all our partners. If we do not significantly strengthen ourselves now, Putin will manage to significantly strengthen himself next year, to strengthen himself to the point where diplomacy will be permanently abandoned. But Ukraine, again, needs to strengthen themselves through delivery of systems, mobilization of men. I don't see where this really lines up in that victory plan. Russia must lose the war against Ukraine. Therefore, Ukraine must win. It's not about Ukraine's territory or sovereignty. Remember, one of the criticisms that was said also was that it didn't talk about liberating that territory, taking that territory back. It speaks about diplomacy. How is this all going to work? Further in his speech. Remember, you can look at all of this online too. The first point is an invitation to NATO right now. So let's speak on the first point. We understand that NATO membership is a matter for the future, not the present. So not asking for right now, but a formal invitation. I want to thank all our partners for support the idea that an invitation for Ukraine to NATO now with membership later strengthens not just us, but strengthens all of us. This is why it's the initial point of the victory plan. So the most important, the first and very important, the sign of determination. This is what the invitation is, an unconditional invitation right now. But we know many times this has been pushed back. Unconditional, no one knows how this is going to end. No one knows the state of which this is going to end. This is why many countries, and the countries that you're going to need, are going to be very wary of signing something unconditional right here and now. How does this look into the future? Again, that's just my take. Break down what Zelensky said about the victory plan, what the victory plan is, and where I see problems in it, and what I think would be appropriate for a victory plan, not a list of wants and needs, some of which have already been pushed down, but doesn't give a clear X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3 step from the window to the wall of how to actually win the battle either. Because that is what it's going to take. If he's saying Russia's going to be more powerful next year, a lot of people are saying that all the people that went from Russia's going to collapse have gone to Russia's going to be more powerful in the coming decade. Righto. Well, therefore, you're going to have to win this territory if 1991 border integrity sovereignty is your goal, which is a fair goal. I'm not disagreeing with that. I've always said it's occupied territory. I agree with the goal. But that doesn't matter if it needs to be done militarily. You need to do it militarily. And what is being taken, what steps being taken by Ukraine, first and foremost, what steps being taken by Ukraine and what steps being taken by the West to mobilise the amount of men and resource that is going to be needed to do that. And there needs to be important calculation in this. Is that possible too? So I think it's disappointing to a hell of a lot of people who thought this was a victory plan. This is how we are going to win. More so than this is how we start some level of discussion and get handed back stuff. Does that make sense? I think it's disappointing. Anyway, I want to talk about a couple of strikes and some weapon systems. Now, I can't show you the video, but we do see another Russian training ground here has been hit with Ukrainian cluster munitions. Now, I will say this is very likely a mass casualty event. Definition of mass cas, you don't have enough medical resources to treat everyone on the ground. There would be a lot of casualties from this. But one thing I will say is if you watch the footage, I'll put the footage on the Telegram, I'm actually very surprised by how many people actually seem to walk away from this, given the nature of how deadly cluster munitions actually bloody are. The video's on the Telegram. Kupiansk. Now, let me show you where Kupiansk is. So here is Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. Red area is occupied since 22. The purple since 2014. The red check, ground that Russians have made in the last 24 hours. The blue, within Ukraine's borders, ground that Ukraine has made back in the last 24 hours. But Kupiansk sits up in here. Of course, we have seen this advancement out Pashani, then splitting into a north and south, as well as advancement around Sinkivka. Now, what got announced yesterday was the complete evacuation of Kupiansk and areas around here of civilians. Now, what we see videos of today is this is a FAB glide bomb, 1,500, so 1,500 kilograms, then striking Kupiansk. I don't have a geolocation for this, but said that a very, very large bomb here landing in Kupiansk. We see that evacuation. Could these be softening up for some further assault in the future? Now, Australia, the land down under, the greatest country on earth in the 90s and early O's and slowly slipping rearwards since maybe I should be the Prime Minister. But Ukraine to receive aging Abrams tanks in latest Australian military aid package. This is of its aging M1A1 fleet, still a very good tank. After we rejected Taipan helicopters to Ukraine, probably should have gone through. Would have they made a difference? No. Like choppers can't be used anywhere near the front line because of bloody the anti-air assets. And the training would have taken an absurd amount of time. The Australian Air Force, we never got the Taipans to a deployment level, and that was in peacetime, very rich country with very experienced staff, and they were a shitbox. They killed people. People should have been charged with fucking murder because of that. So I think Ukraine probably dodged a bullet on that one, to be honest. Albanese government has confirmed it will now gift 49 of these American-made M1A1 tanks to Ukraine. So great amount of firepower going in. Again, with all of this, I'll believe it when I see it on the ground because we know Ukraine's been waiting a hell of a long time for some of these promises. That said, fuck the tanks. I think Ukraine should request... So Australia, we've had a massive switch over in our land forces to different armoured vehicles on the ground. M113 APCs, we have a shitload of them. And ours are AS4 variant, so a newer variant. If I was Ukraine, I'd request just give me all of those. You're not using them anymore. You're using them for some training, but you've updated that to a newer bloody vehicle. And our ASLAVs, so LAV-style infantry fighting vehicle, similar, I guess, to it's like a wheeled Bradley, somewhat. It's not as heavily armoured, but whatever. And what we've seen is the Bradley has been way more useful than the tanks. I'd be saying, hey, look, tanks are great. Give us those. Can we also have all of those retired vehicles as well? We know they're sitting around in storage bloody somewhere as they slowly get replaced, but can we get them that? Yeah, I think the Bradleys have been far more important than the main battle tanks have been. Maybe that is something we're seeing come out of war. Now, of course, I showed you the map. I want to show you some interesting bits and pieces of some footage that I have seen too. So where do we want to start? Let's start north and head south. So we have the north up here. Of course, this is where Ukraine crossed into Kursk, and took an amount of ground in the Kursk Oblast, although there is a large amount of speaking that there is deployment of assault forces back in here and that Russia has taken back a lot of territory. So this is a Russian sources map here. Now, what this is showing is that Russia is really actually creating some level of pincer further to cut off these Ukrainian troops out near then Kotonovo too. Again, I don't know what is exactly happening in here. But again, this is something just to keep an eye on because you can see even from this map some level of then cut off pincer maneuver potentially happening somewhere in here. So that I don't normally use that map. I'm not saying to take that map as truthful, but you can see that it is getting thinner and thinner out of that area. But we know there has been then advances in here and further attacks. So we can see that around Lyubimovka, that Noel reports does show that Russia has taken some ground up along this road. Now this is seconded by Syriac's map in here. As we can see this red territory around here, this is Lyubimovka. Let me move this across so you can see it. Up along Lyubimovka, there has been further Russian attacks and further attacks in this Novonovka. That's going to be it. So we do know there's definitely been some amount of attack and successful attack and advancement in here. But this is interesting too. It's from Zurich. The Ukrainian army sent new reinforcements to Kursk, and the front began to stabilise again. The Russian advance towards Shuja will slow down, and the Ukrainian collapse is not expected this October. The recapture of Kursk by Russian forces will be gradual, while the front will continue to be an attrition for Ukrainian forces, similar to what is happening in the north of Kharkiv. So, saying that more forces are being in here, I think Ukraine, they wanting to hold this at basically any cost for the US elections to have that too. If there is some forced, if Trump gets in and, look, we need to negotiate, then they'll at least have, look, at least we hold 600, 700, 800 square kilometres of Russia. But then we need to look then on the eastern side here. So we have Suja, Borki, Ulenok areas I'm sure you are familiar with. Now there is this video here. I'll put on the Telegram so you can watch it. But Noel Reports says this. Russian mech assault with 4 infantry fighting vehicles landed troops to storm positions in this region. So where we're talking is, I actually believe it's this tree line right along here somewhere. So still in this grey zone. Targeted the infantry with cluster munitions and destroyed 2 IFVs during the retreat out of here. The footage, it's not super clear what happened in this, because any edited footage like this, you can edit to make it look a failed or successful assault. And I've seen both Russian and Ukrainian pages edit in a way that looks successful movement. That said, we know there's a lot of attacks and a lot of fighting happening specifically in this area. So let's just come down and we'll come into then Kharkiv Oblast, and we see some blue on this map, of course, where Ukraine has made ground within 2 weeks, but this has been over the last 24 hours, just to the north of Lipsy in here. And this is further backed up. Now, it was said to be some Ukrainian SF units that I think it was the GUR and I think someone said Kraken, I think they said in here, but Kharkiv Axis, Ukraine army recaptured serious positions, so Ukraine definitely had a successful attack in here. These two maps showing very similar. We know Ukraine had then a successful attack and has taken some amount of ground in here. But no changes on this map. Oh, wait. No, that's not new, sorry. Sometimes I miss it because it's so much easier to see the red check. I wish it was blue check or blue for like 24 hours, not for the 2 weeks. But let's move down into Seversk. Now, of course, we had those flags raised right out among here and right out among here over the past week that ended up just being like very temporary. But we have seen something recently. So what it seems like Russia's doing with a lot of the attacks is initially using Iskanders to take out high-level targets, softening up an area with FABs, and right before they launch an assault, using the TOS-1 Alpha, the heavy flamethrower thermobarics multi-launch system, to then like really soften up that remaining area before then there is assault. Now, I saw this basically in this order happen on this, I'm just going to call it the Verk area down in here, because I try to pronounce it and everyone laughs at me. So this is a geolocation. So you can see right here is the geolocation of where we are. Let me bring it up. I've already drawn it onto this map. So where we see this road then turn out. So it's right about here somewhere. So just down. Yeah. So right in here, this is where we are seeing then Russia use TOS-1 Alpha thermobarics. And these are a devastating weapon here. You can see them coming in on these multi-launch systems. So softening up of this last remaining, say with these thermobarics, these are a devastating weapon. But then what we see today is Syriac then says there's an advancement right in and around this area, just to the north of it, but also in and around this front. So one, we know there's definitely presence of Ukrainian forces down in here, but maybe that advancement, the last, this is what Volgodar happened. Iskanders for large targets, FABs for the initial soften up, TOS right before there is then assaulting forces moving in. But it's also saying that there is further advancement just to the north amongst the then white hill to the north in this sector as well. So just to get an idea, we probably see some advancements in there. Let's move down the map and turn this on. Sorry, I missed one in here. In Nevsky, right in here, we have seen, after clearing operations, a Russian flag be flown. This is difficult to see. Oh my God, I wish I had better eyes for this. So let's get an idea, see where this prong comes out. So we're speaking basically parallel right in, I guess, here somewhere. Let's go right on the edge here. What we see is definitely Russian presence here, as we do see destroyed town, but with then a Russian flag flying out of the window by those forces in here. And this saying liberated, the completion of the cleanup. At the moment, Russian forces continue to expand control of the north and south of Nevsky. And we do know some people say that Nevsky and Makivka are connected through there. Now let's look at changes. Out from New York, Nepelivka, we have seen that this ground that was made has been returned under Russian control. Now remember, some say the Russians are right out near Leonivka. Here too, let's push down Pokrovsk. Things are moving again, mainly on the northern flank around Seladove. This is an area very important to keep an eye on, as well as a southern push in line with Hernik down to this road as well, which is, if you see, one of the only roads heading out of Hernik and this entire salient through here. This will become very, very important in winter if there's no good roads and things start getting cut off. As we move further down, of course, we have Vladar Vodiane, and further up near Antonivka, we just see a Russian advancement on the deep state map there. So some Ukrainian advancement, some Russian advancement, a little bit of everything. But speaking a little bit of everything, that is me done for the day. I hope that you have a fantastic day. We're in for a storm, I think. Look after yourselves, and I will speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.